meeting is going to be with Mike Dudgeon. He's a state representative for the 25th District, which represents parts of South Forsyth County. He serves as the chair of the Education Subcommittee on Academic Support and is on the Science, Technology, Energy, Utilities, Telecom, and Small Business Committees. And Mike is here to discuss the Convention of States, which was sanctioned under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. So without further ado, Mike.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate y'all having me here to speak. Sherry talked me into it and then said, that I'm leaving, so you have to get by yourself. So I'm still glad to be here. Real quickly, I'll point out that, and I'll tell you just my 2-minute background, how I got into local politics. I think most of you know the story, but I always like to at least tell it for the real brief version. But on Monday nights is probably the toughest night for me to make things. I do 2 things. I have church, work, family. And I do a lot with the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout and 2 boys who are almost Eagle Scouts. And those meetings are on Monday nights. And then by one thing I do for fun that's not related to the community is I'm a high school basketball was and now high school football official. They meet on Monday night. So Monday night is kind of my hardest night to meet, and so I apologize for not getting to as many of these meetings. But back in 2006, I ran for the school board against an incumbent. At the same time, my friend back there, Jim Harrell, was running for the commission for the first time. And got into local politics because I was kind of upset with some things the school board was doing. Managed to beat an incumbent, which is hard to do. Got elected to the school board, sort of 4 years there. And then in 2010, I was elected to the General Assembly to replace Tom Knox, who opened up the seat when he ran for insurance commissioner. I've served 4 years in the General Assembly. In my real world, I'm a technology entrepreneur. I'm right now the chief technology officer for a video game company in Alpharetta. I've done various technology things in the Alpharetta, North Fulton area for the past 25 years. It keeps me very busy. I'm glad George is a part-time legislature, and we'll get to that in a minute too, but I stay pretty busy, but I think it actually makes a better perspective for legislators when they're out in the real world most of the time and only doing politics part of the time. And I even heard Rob Woodall, our congressman, say that he thinks even the United States Congress should be part-time, because if those people had to have a real job instead of their permanent job as being a congressman with a $150K salary and all these perks, then you might get a different quality of person. So I'm happy to serve with Jeff, who also is a very hardworking family man, and we have another hardworking family man, Michael, coming in next year. So those kind of people give you good representation because you stay around. So I'll tell you kind of how I got into the whole states' rights Article 5 thing, a little bit of a quick story. So the legislature is kind of like a high school. And Michael's about to be a freshman, and so he's going to be a freshman next year. He's going to go to the high school. And like all of us, he's going to be looking around like, gee, what's going on? I don't know anybody, and kind of bouncing off the walls, and people haze you a little bit. And it's all part of the thing, because it's a big group. There's 236 people in the legislature. So something Michael will start this fall, there'll be these get-togethers and meetings and stuff where you meet all these people. And one of those meetings before I was sworn in, I was at a meeting, and we got done, and we were standing out there in the lobby of the hotel, and we were talking. I started talking to a couple of my new freshman classmates. They're all excited about getting to be in the legislature, and somehow we got into the federal government, even though we're a state government. And we started throwing arrows and rocks about how big and crazy the federal government has been. And a guy named Kevin Cook, who Jeff knows really well, representative from Carrollton, actually has an old Speaker Murphy's old seat over there in West Georgia. And Kevin and I started talking about, you know what, you can trace the explosion of the federal government to 1913, when 2 amendments were passed to the U.S. Constitution, neither of which is any good. The 17th Amendment allowed, instead of the states appointing the U.S. senators, it became directly elected. And then we also had the income tax. 1-2 punch. Those 2 things were like throwing gasoline on the federal government, that it grew to this monster that we have today. So Kevin and I a bunch of other people said, we're freshmen, we're going to go in there on the first day of the legislative session, we're going to drop a resolution calling for the repeal of the 17th Amendment. And so we got all excited, and we went and we got our resolution drafted up, and we got a bunch of us freshmen to sign it, and basically called for Congress to repeal the 17th Amendment. And we got them super excited, and I'm going to turn my phone off now so I don't get more embarrassed by ringing phones. Got to the legislature and had our resolution, and we called dropping it. You go to the clerk and you hand it to them, you get your signatures on it, and you give it to the clerk, and then the clerk publishes it, and becomes an official document and it goes to committee and all this stuff. We got all really excited, and we learned our first lesson about the legislature, which is that if the leadership doesn't like your bill, it doesn't even get out of the gate. So we didn't even get what's called a hearing on that bill. The bill was introduced. We wanted a hearing where we could present a case, talk about federal overreach and things like that, and we never got out of square one. So our first lesson in being a freshman is you can have the best idea, even a good or bad idea. You've got to have, unfortunately, the way it works in both the federal and the state system is if the leadership doesn't like it, it's very hard to get going unless you have grassroots support. But it started a thing that I got out right out of the gate was around our misbalance today with the federal government and the state government's powers. And I'm not saying this because I want to become some all-power mad state legislator who makes all these controls. I firmly believe that we've got to keep the decisions closer to the people. Another example, when they opened the 85 HOV toll lane, when they switched it from HOV to toll, you all remember that. That was a questionable way they went about that, but here's an interesting thing about how goofy the federal government system is. About 2 weeks after they opened it, they realized they'd only put like 3 little places where you could go in and out of the lane. And so the state said, we need to add 2 more places. We're going to go send the truck, and we're going to just do a couple little dash lines or whatever and put up the sign and solve some of the traffic problems. But guess what? We couldn't do that until we got the approval of some assistant undersecretary of transportation who's some 28-year-old Ivy League policy graduate who had the power to sit in D.C. and tell us whether we had permission or not to change our own interstate because it was an interstate highway. And it gets to show how the tentacles of the federal government have kind of reached into everything. So, been always trying to brainstorm ways to go about it. This past legislative session, Georgia took a lead on a subject which is controversial, and I'd love to have the discussion here because some people, when we mention this, think this is a bad idea. I'll tell you why I think it's a good idea, and I'd love to have a debate with those who think it's a bad idea, and we will agree to disagree if we don't come to an agreement. But the idea is this. I think most people in this room would agree the federal government's out of control, so what do we do about it? We want the government to go back to its constitutional size, limit, and authority. And most people believe that the number one problem that's fueling the federal government is the balanced budget thing. And I would say the biggest threat to my kids, to my future grandkids, is a massive fiscal disaster caused by the United States going bankrupt, going default, a massive currency crisis caused by our deficits. And by continuing to run massive unbalanced budgets for year after year, I think we all know we're going to pay the piper someday. So the way I look at it is this. If we don't do anything, and Congress doesn't seem like it has the whatever to do anything about it, and we're heading toward this train of fiscal disaster, and that's almost, I'm going to say almost certain, but very, very likely to happen. And we've tried all kinds of other things to stop it. Congress is not going to propose a balanced budget amendment because it takes 2/3 of the Congress, and I think we know that getting 2/3 of the Congress to do that is going to be almost impossible. There's another way, and the founders always, as you know, our founders were divinely inspired, but they were also geniuses, and they kept finding little ways in the Constitution to try to make checks and balances to keep different people in check. We all know that the president can veto legislation, judiciary can overrule laws, but they wanted the states to be part of that checks and balances too. And the states were supposed to be, since they created the federal government, the states were supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of all this. And they were thinking, well, if Congress can create can propose amendments by passing it by 2/3, then what about the states? And Article 5 says, and I'll quote a little bit here, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or on the applications of legislatures of 2/3 of the states, Congress shall call a convention proposing amendments, which in either case, any amendments must be ratified by legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. So basically, there's a two-way process to get an amendment. The Congress can propose an amendment by voting for 2/3 both houses. That's how all the amendments we have today have come about. Or the states can do by two-thirds of the states, demand that Congress call a convention, and then this convention can propose amendments. No matter how any of that happens, it doesn't matter whether the amendment comes from a convention, comes from Congress, comes from wherever, all of it, none of it becomes in the Constitution until it is passed by 3/4 of the state legislatures. 3/4 of the states have to adopt it no matter where it comes from. And that's important as we get into some of the details of how these conventions work. So this has become a very popular idea in the past 2, 3, 4 years. And this year we actually had 3 different flavors, I call this, come through the Georgia General Assembly. We passed all of them by pretty much, I don't think we had any Republican no votes. We may have had a straggler here or two, and we had a handful of Democrat votes with us, but for the most part it was a Republican initiative. But these, and I'll give you the 3 different sort of initiatives that we had and the pros and cons of each, and then we'll talk a little bit about runaway conventions, which is a concern of a lot of people. And then I want to throw it up into questions and get a discussion going. So the simplest thing to do is just say, we want a very generic call for a convention about a balanced budget amendment. That one's been around for a while, and we passed one of those, and it basically says the state of Georgia would like to call a convention for proposing a balanced budget amendment. That is called the Balanced Budget Amendment Group. And this map right here shows you that the green is 24 states have passed the similar resolution calling for a balanced budget amendment. We need 2/3, which is 2/3 of 50. I should know that number is in here.
34.
What's that?
34 states.
Yes. And the yellow one that's been proposed, I think like your Californias and New York and New Massachusetts are not even going to try because they know that's kind of hopeless to try to get them to agree to any kind of fiscal sanity. But there is 34 states on here that can well do it. Actually 36. And so that would call for that. That's kind of the most wide open kind of generic, like, okay, we just want a balanced budget convention. Another idea is called the Compact for America. And the Compact for America we passed also, and it was like a 20-page bill. And if you've heard, the Constitution allows states to make compacts with each other. So the states can enter into compacts which sort of don't even involve Congress, but the states all agree to do something. One compact that we entered into during my term in the legislature was around military children's education to make it easier that if I'm a kid at Fort Dix and I get moved to Fort Benning, that I can quickly get my records and I can work with those kids in the education system in order to do a better job of dealing with the kids who are transferred around in the military family. So the states got together and passed a compact saying all of our departments of education, all of our bureaucracies will work with each other in order to make this smooth as possible. Again, it's a way for states to come to agreement. It's legal under the Constitution, but doesn't involve Congress per se. Lets the states kind of make up their own rules. So the idea with the Compact for America is there's some people, and they're rightfully nervous about a sort of wide open convention. You know, we're going to talk about balanced budget amendment. What does that mean? We're going to balance a budget by taxing everybody 85%. So this basically says we're going to go ahead and make rules, actually have the text for the amendment, and then very strict rules on exactly how the convention will behave. And all of that is there in one piece of legislation, which means that if Georgia passes that exact same legislation, and Alabama passes that, and 34 states pass it, not only have they agreed on not just an idea for an amendment, but text for an amendment, they agree on rules that say, if you're the delegate from Georgia and you go vote, you only have one thing to vote on, and that's yes or no about this amendment. You can't be making up other crazy amendments. You can't take the amendment from Massachusetts where you're going to talk about getting rid of the Second Amendment or something crazy like that. And then it's very, very structured. It's very attorney-esque, but it makes it so that there's a comfort level that there would not be problems with the Constitutional Convention, because we've only had one, and that was back in the 1780s, and it gave us our new Constitution, and we'll talk about that one in a minute. So it also actually has a resolution that Congress would have to pass, Congress would use to recognize when 2/3 of the states had adopted the compact. So you've got method one, which is kind of generic, just going to say we want a balanced budget convention. That's got the most states by far. This compact is newer, it has less states, I don't have the exact number, but it's more structured in the way it's doing. But both of those are related to balanced budget amendment. Interestingly enough, the one with the Compact America, the actual text of the amendment actually says we would set a debt limit of 105% of where we are today whenever it passed, and saying the only way to raise the debt limit is not Congress, but the states would have to approve raising the debt limit. It would not be congressional authority anymore to do that. The third method is called the Convention of States. And that is kind of like the balanced budget thing, but even more broad, and the fact just saying, these people say, we're just so far off the track with the federal government, we need more than just a balanced budget. So there's topics that are involved in the Convention of States. They involve limiting federal government power and limiting and balancing the budget. And there's a third one, and I feel bad that I didn't prepare to bring it with you. I apologize for that. But it's all around limited government. So basically, the idea is that the topics are not the Second Amendment. The topics are not a right to abortion. The topics are not liberal topics. The topics are topics that are conservative, and they would be the only topics covered at said convention. And so we passed a call for that one also. We also passed yet another piece of legislation by my friend Timmy Barr from over in Hall County, which is what we call the Delegate Limitation Act. I actually printed that one out. This one is basically saying, well, what happens if we appoint Joe Smith as a delegate to the Constitutional Convention and tell him that the instructions are to vote only for a balanced budget amendment, and he goes rogue? Or actually, who do we even want to be these delegates? Do we want the governor appointing them? Do we want the lieutenant governor appointing them? Do we want the speaker? Do we want the legislature appointing them? And of course, the legislature decided that the legislature should appoint them. And if you look at it from a meaning of how the power from the people is supposed to work, the power of the people is supposed to be reflected most accurately through the legislature. That's the way we've been set up. Hopefully you agree with that, but if not, that is the way that our government was set up. And so if we're going to have somebody speaking for the state of Georgia, they're not speaking for Nathan Deal, they're speaking for the legislature, which is the 236 representatives of you who are speaking through our delegates to the convention. So this will allow the legislature, the House and the Senate, to pick delegates. Not only pick them, it allows them by law to give them specific instructions, like you will do this, but not do that. It also says that if you go rogue, that you're recalled. And it says if you intentionally go rogue, that's a misdemeanor and the Attorney General can prosecute you. And we did all this, and it may seem like overkill. But let me tell you why we went through the necessity of doing this. One is we wanted to make sure that it was the will of the people and not become an overly political process. And two, there's a fear, and this is where a lot of people, a lot of Tea Party, a lot of other conservatives have vigorously opposed Article 5 conventions because they're afraid of the runaway convention phenomenon. The runaway convention here is this. We send a bunch of people to St. Louis to have a constitutional convention. They're supposed to talk about balanced budgets. If you're back in 1780s, when they went to fix Articles of Confederation, when they came back, they didn't have to fix for that. They had a brand new constitution. I'm not a super historian, but I do know enough about that, and I've read that a lot of people argue that a lot of those delegates who came there kind of knew they were going to have to redo it, and they had that authority. It's kind of murky in history to know exactly what that happened, but it's certainly to the average Joe on the street who thought they had the Articles of Confederation, and these guys came back and said, oh, no surprise, here's a new constitution. There was a little bit different. So the fear is the same thing would happen. So these people go off to St. Louis, they drink the liberal Kool-Aid for some weird reason, and they come out with some crazy constitution. I used to have printed on my office door a quote by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is one of the most frightening things you ever see. It says, she says the Constitution needs to be rewritten to give people a right to a job, a right to housing, a right to food, a right to all these things you're supposed to have a right to, and she thinks that needs to be in the Constitution. So what would happen if we ended up with a rogue convention that came up with this Constitution which said no rights to guns, no rights to privacy, everyone's supposed to have a right to a job, the minimum wage needs to be $30 an hour, whatever sort of crazy thing we're worried about. And here comes this Constitution down the pike, and now, oh my gosh, the country's even more dead than it is today. And the thing to remember, at least in my opinion, and I'll tell you in sort of in summary why I'm in favor of these in a minute, but it's still, no matter what the convention comes up with, that's just a proposal. That still has to go to 3/4 of the states. If 3/4 of the states would approve a constitution that says we have no Second Amendment rights and that we're going to be a communist utopia, If that's already the state we're in, if that's the way we're in as a country, then we're already done. In my opinion, it's over, and we all need to pray for forgiveness from God because we've screwed it up so bad we can't get out of it. So I don't think we're in a state yet where 3/4 of the states would pass such a terrible constitution. There's a little bit of fear that there's two ways to ratify the states. You can have a ratifying convention as opposed to legislature. And there's fear that 500 liberals get together in downtown Atlanta and set up a little tent and say, we are the Constitutional Convention, and some rogue federal judge who was appointed by Bill Clinton's on the bench and declares that they're an official ratifying convention of the state of Georgia and says that they can go off and ratify it because they're a meeting of the people and blah, blah, blah. And you know what? I can't say that that couldn't possibly happen. And that is a risk, I guess, but I don't think it happened all over the country, and I think you'd have more of a, I'll put a civil unrest with some people that I know of before anything like that would happen. I'll just be nice and put it that way. But yeah, so there is risk. This is unknown. This whole Article 5 thing's never been done. It's kind of crazy. You got states trying to stop the federal government. Mark Levin put out a book about this, and I can't think of the name, but I've read it twice now. The Liberty Amendments. Liberty Amendments, I think, and he's got a list of about 15 ideas that he has, and the actual text of the amendments that he believes, Mark believes that this is the last sort of bullet in the gun to try to do something to restrain the federal government. And so when thinking about this, I've thought about risk. I've got some good friends, and Jeff and I have some good friends in our sort of little group that we hang with in our high school that is the legislature, and they're a little bit afraid about the runaway convention and whether this is worth it, but here's what I think. I'm 47 years old. I've got a kid who's 19, 16, and 15. I've been messing with money and a treasurer and my own business and things for a long time, and I can do fiscal math, and I know that 90% of our money exists in the computer anyway. It's not even anything real. You know, when Bank A loans to Bank B, they're just doing it in a computer. It doesn't even move in any real money. And with a system based like that, with a massive deficit-based system like we have, and the whole world hinging on the dollar, it seems to me like the risk of continuing on this deficit spending forever, or for the next 10, 15, 20 years, that is almost guaranteed to lead to really, really bad. If there's some risk in Article 5 convention, I'm willing to concede that, yeah, maybe there's some risk, but it's kind of like you go to the doctor says, well, you got terminal disease, you got this kind of cancer, you're going to die. But I have this drug I can give you, and it 99 or 95% will maybe cure you, and 5% it might kill you. Well, I'm going to die anyway. To me, it's kind of worth taking risk and doing something a little bit unknown. And I'm thinking again that our founding fathers from heaven have left us a little get out of jail free card in this Article 5 process to try to do something to restrain the federal government. Because, and I've seen this in the state and everybody else, governments tend to grow to as much power as they can get. I mean, this is sort of a natural, unfortunate law of governments. And once we gave them the income tax, and once we gave them no state restraint by having the Senate elected by the people instead of appointed by the states, they've kind of grown to be this monster, and they're not going to, it's going to be very hard to get them to restrain themselves. And with our nation divided so closely, unfortunately, along political lines, you can get some agreement on balanced budget. That's one area where you get some Democrats to come over to your side. And there just might be enough momentum to do that. Another thing I firmly believe, too, is no politician likes to have somebody steal their power, their thunder. So I think if 34 states pass this, and the plans are starting being made, we're going to book the Carrier Dome in Syracuse and have the convention, or we're going to go out to Kansas City and have this convention, I think really fast that the U.S. Congress would perk up and say, if they're going to do this, if we don't, and maybe we'll get their attention, and maybe they would propose amendments, and then we would not even have to go through the convention. Because I've seen that many times in politics, where you don't actually have to go all the way through with something. If you get pretty close where they think it might happen, then everybody starts paying attention, and they start saying, I want to go through, and I want to be the person at the party. I want to be the one writing the amendment. I don't want it to be somebody else that I don't control. So there's that area as well, that this whole process applies a ton of pressure to Congress that they've never felt before. Because it's real easy to talk games about balanced budgets. I mean, you can campaign for it all day long, balanced budget, but you really kind of need the discipline, because in order to balance the budget, we all know that is a hugely difficult, disruptive thing with the way that the government's already gotten so far behind in the social and entitlement program. This is going to be painful. But, again, I use the cancer analogy. If, your treatment may be painful, but the alternative is much worse. So we continue to think in Georgia about states' rights things. I mean, this is the biggest one that we're talking about. I mean, I think Jeff or somebody may have talked about this before. We had a bill this year also to try to keep the state employees from helping to implement Obamacare. If the federal government wants to do it, great. I can't stop you, but I sure as heck don't have to have the state of Georgia do it. Like the UGA had a navigator program, we got rid of that. Trying to get money out of the budget, though, to be honest with you, they stuck some money in there that we ended up voting on, and I apologize for that, but not as much as it would have been. But trying to get the states to reassert their rights. Tom Grace has a great bill which says stop taxing our gas and taking the money to Washington, and then you have to beg and plead to send it back to Georgia. Tom would rather us stay here again because we have a better steward for what our tax money should be used on with roads than the U.S. Congress does. I think this is a defining issue of our time, and you're starting to see, I go to, when you're in the state legislature, we have conferences of other state legislators from around the country and get together, and we're seeing more and more energy on this. And again, it's a little bit bipartisan, which is actually good, especially on the balanced budget. I think that the average Democrat who is really thinking about their country, I think if they saw the wave going that way, and interesting enough too, it's kind of funny, if the state, some say something closely Democrat-Republican state, passes a balanced budget convention thing, and that Democrat doesn't have to be the one to balance the budget, because that's going to be Congress's issue, but they at least get to be on the record of doing that, because that's have to be a very popular thing to be elected on. That's kind of all I have for my sort of spiel up here. Be glad to answer questions about this. Also talk about anything else with the state legislator or about local politics, or I'll stay and talk and answer questions about almost anything. And then I'll hide behind Jeff if I get in trouble. Anyway, so at this point I'd like to open up for any questions or comments or anything about that, and just curious to what y'all think. Yes, sir.
Trying to get rid of the 16th Amendment?
I would love to get rid of that one too, yes, sir. That 16th and 17th back to back, the income tax and the direct election of senators. That's going to be a harder one. I will tell you that in 2011, I was part of a group of people pushing really hard to lower the Georgia income tax rate, because we have a 6% rate, to try to lower that down to more like 3% by increasing the sales tax a bit and getting rid of some of the deductions and spreading around the sales tax a little bit more fairly. That was shot down by lobbyists and by the fact that it takes a lot of guts to change tax things. Because anytime you change the taxes, there's a winner and a loser, right? So if I do a fair tax tomorrow and Rob Woodall's bill, we go through, I think it's great for the economy. I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's great to get rid of the IRS. Good grief, and you get rid of the IRS. But there's going to be some people who pay more money. And so those people always are going to complain. They're going to protest. And what happened was, my funny case with the sales tax thing was that by removing some of the exemptions on sales tax, for example, one thing that was going to get taxed was Girl Scout cookies. I got 500 emails, 500, from people who were just totally apoplectic about the idea we were going to tax Girl Scout cookies. And I was like, but you're going to have a 6% pay cut, 6% return because you're paying income tax. But everybody, and then the people who didn't want this, and there was a car auto service people said, well, you're going to start taxing not just certain parts but labor on your car. I said, well, if you're going to get rid of 6% of income tax, you have to replace at least a lot of that with something else. And that's a difficulty in changing taxes. But I think absolutely the federal level, where it'd be more uniform, I'm all for getting rid of that. The problem is that, I'll just be straight up blunt, is most of our colleagues in the legislature are not up for picking what I would call big fights with the federal government. So that's why the 17th Amendment resolution didn't really go very well, and some of the 16th has not done it. The balanced budget, though, is, I guess, popular enough that it's able to move forward, but some of these other fights that we would like to take, again, I'm privileged to be here in one of the most conservative counties in the United States. I have a lot of colleagues in the legislature who are not from the most conservative county. They may be Republicans, but they're not quite as much into sort of poking the federal bear, so to speak. But it's disappointing. I think if we had more leadership on it, we could do better. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Let me first of all say I'm very much in favor of what you've been saying,
Okay.
all the arguments, I
Yeah.
agree 100% with you. The only thing is that I would say, kind of being
Sure.
the devil's advocate
Yes.
here, if we'd have had this 4 years ago and passed this amendment, with the current administration, they probably would have ignored it anyway. So in a way, we're going to have to make sure that if we get a BBA or whatever, that we put plenty of chains in that to chain Washington down.
I think and pray about it all the time. I think of, Ben Franklin's quote to the old lady on the street, "Ma'am, we've given you a republic if you can keep it." And the ultimate defender of the Constitution is not the courts. The ultimate defender of the Constitution is the people. And if the people are not willing to go crazy and go nuts that the Constitution is being shredded one piece at a time, then, like I said, power creeps and they think they can get away with it. One example, it's not even around the U.S. Constitution, but just blew my mind, was like 8 years ago, and when the New Jersey Democratic senator nominee was like October. And all of a sudden some scandal or something blew up with him and he was going to lose. So he just quit and they put old Wattenberg in there as a replacement nominee, even though the New Jersey law said no changes could be made after September 15th. It was as crystal clear as you could possibly get. And the New Jersey Supreme Court said, we don't care, you can do that. And we've gotten to the place where I think you're exactly right and it worries me. And if I had an answer to that, I don't have an answer to that, but I think by one of these amendments, by getting the state legislators in the process, it'd be kind of hard to kind of ignore that. But I don't know, we need a revival, we need prayer, we need something. I don't know what it is, but we need people to demand that we actually pay attention to the Constitution. And it's a tough one. Hey, Terry.
Hey, does anybody ever put in an ultimatum? I mean, all these resolutions, and everybody's gonna put some ultimatums in and give them, hit them hard instead of telling them what you think you want. Tell them what you want or something. Ultimatums are what they use.
I'll give you an example. I mean, it's not exactly ultimatum. So the resolution we did when I was a freshman about the 17th Amendment, did we do it last year too, Jeff, 2 years ago? We did another one this other session too. Yeah. That one was just, like you said, asking, please Congress, please repeal the 17th Amendment. At least the Balanced Budget Convention calls circumvent Congress. They're like, the state is saying we're going to do something in the Constitution, and Congress, we don't really care what you think. We're kind of trying to go around you. So it is kind of an ultimatum in a way, but again, when we started pushing the anti-Obamacare legislation, the original version was stronger, but what you're finding is that you don't have as strong of a political will in the General Assembly, and I think it's probably true for other states, to pick those bigger fights with the feds. Because it's just easier just to stay in the safe zone. So you need to make sure that, and I think you've got some good representatives, I would think, in this area who are willing to pick fights when they need to be picked, and that's one of those fights, Jerry. You're right. It just needs to happen.
But why do we have a governor?
The Constitution of Georgia says we're going to have a governor.
Yeah, but he could be the one to make an ultimatum and say, we're not going to send you any money.
Yeah.
And then get all you guys together, sign
Yeah.
whatever you have to sign, say, we're not sending you any more money.
But that requires a compact of states
Yeah.
that Mike was talking
But
about.
that's
something
right.
like that.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
good.
need to get a bunch
Yeah.
of states
But
together.
that's
to
hopefully,
do that.
that's where you're going with it, I hope.
I would, in my ideal world, the Republican governors would go off somewhere in their own little mini convention, and if they all stood together and said, you know what, we're not sending in our Medicaid money, we're not sending in our transportation money.
That might happen.
If they did that, it would be extraordinarily powerful. But it is a difficult, just saying it's difficult, it's a very, very risky political thing in a lot of people's mind. But, I think we're in a position where we're in a bad enough situation where we have to try risky things, and that's why I'm with these, and I agree with you. Yes, sir.
Mike, can I give you a trivia question, or you and the rest of the group? In recent history, there was an attempt for an Article 5 convention that came very close to being successful. Do you know how many states they got to? Who was one of the key people in pushing it? Very well-known person. and you know why it failed.
I should know that. I didn't do my homework.
No, well, I've been following this
Good.
Article 5 convention
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
a number of places.
Yeah.
So I attended a meeting where this
Yes.
came up. They got to 32 states.
Mhm.
The key person that was, one of the key people pushing it
Mhm.
was our dear friend Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wow.
And the reason that it failed was because it was torpedoed by the Republican establishment because they were frightened of a runaway convention.
Yeah, I mean, the runaway convention thing, there's some people who are just, I mean, I went out, I got pulled out in the ropes, I don't know if Jeff did or not, and I had some people get in my face. You cannot be doing this, you're gonna doom the country, and da-da-da, and I appreciate their passion. And I agree it might be risky, but I think I've made hopefully my case in that. And the one thing I found being in the legislature is that, you know, I have a yes button and a no button, and I tell this a lot. I don't have a maybe button or a, gee, I'd like this if we change these 5 things button, or a, you know, maybe we'll do it next year button. I get 2 buttons, a yes button and a no button. And you just take complex issues and weigh them in the balance. And then this one was like, you know what, I think on the balance it's yes. And even trying the different flavors I explained, I think are important. But that's interesting, you know, obviously just a regular balanced budget came within a couple of votes coming through the Congress back, I believe, in the 80s, wasn't it? Or during that time frame as well. So good grief, I wish they had gotten off their butts and done that. So,
I think that was actually what you said about if we were to get this close.
that's right.
What happened,
Yeah.
there was a bunch of people, they got
Yeah.
to 32 states, and at that point, Congress did actually talk
That's
about
right.
a BBA, but they couldn't just quite get it through. And I think that, in Congress, it was the Democrats.
That's right.
that
But
they
the establishment
discovered it.
in the other thing.
But for the convention of states, it was, you
Yeah.
know, and they had no love for Ronnie anyway.
Yeah.
But,
I remember very clearly when our cumulative debt got to be $1 trillion a month. My gosh, $1 trillion, we're doomed. And now it was $1 trillion a year for a couple of years there. And I'm hoping that the national psyche, and one thing, and I've talked to Jeff about this, you know, he agrees, is that I try to do things in the legislature as a Republican that are conservative free market things that how also appeal to the younger generation. Because we don't want to lose the people in their 20s and 30s so that conservatism dies off. So what can I do? I can train my children, you can do all that kind of stuff, but I try to pick issues that I think will resonate with kids who are younger age. And this issue, the poll, it does resonate. Those kids are not stupid. They may be a little bit liberal, some are leaning, they're certainly more socially liberal than my generation, and a lot of the older generations. But on balanced budget thing, they kind of get it. They kind of know this is kind of dumb. They kind of get to know that the need that we can't just be doing what we're doing today forever. So this is an issue that does resonate with some of the younger people. I'll go ahead and mention another bill that I'm going to be working on this year. I had a phone call on the way up that I think will resonate with a lot of people. And it's called the Right to Try legislation, which essentially says if you have terminal illness and you want to try an experimental drug or therapy or something that has not gone all the way through FDA approval but has been through the basic safety part, then it will allow you to, as long as you sign your liability, it's your life, your business, you get to try these therapies. The ALS Foundation, if you've seen these ice bucket challenges here on Facebook, you see that all the time. Those ALS guys I've worked with them for many years, and they're helping promote this. The Gold One Institute is also helping promote it. But again, that's the kind of thing where you talk about taking advantage, taking control of your own life, helping people terminally ill. Those are, again, the kind of things where Republicans can do, I think, and work that out. I was also the leading spokesman back in 2011-12 for no state money for the Falcons' new stadium. Luckily, we were successful there. We pushed it on the city of Atlanta, and they had to pay for it, not the state, which is great in my opinion. Though I think Atlanta still got suckered, and I think Cobb County is getting suckered right now with the Braves. But that's another issue where I found very much resonance with the 20-somethings. The 20-somethings like, I can't believe that the Republican people wanted to pay money for millionaires in the NFL or whatever. So again, I think it's important that we pick issues, and I support all kinds of things, but I try to advocate for things that also help bring that younger generation into the fold, because we don't want to lose that generation or we're really in trouble. Yes, sir, Rebecca, do you have a question?
What redress do we have if Congress doesn't move in a timely fashion on
On
any
calling it?
amendment or amendments that the convention would put forward?
That's a great question. I will read to you. They're supposed to call it. There's these people here, I mean, we don't know. I mean, the Constitution says they have no choice but to call the convention if the applications are made. You could go to the courts and try to compel Congress to act. Again, I'm not certain we could compel them to do anything. And again, you're getting to the point where the president may say, no, we're not doing it, and come get me if you can. I mean, I hate to think that we're in a place like that, but I would just, again, I go to the fact that I'm hoping that if 34 states apply for the balanced budget, and you had these 34 states asking for it, and you had, even the liberal media would have to say that this was the Article 5 process, that Congress would not be so bold as to just straight out ignore it. I can't promise you, I don't know what redress I have. If I had one, I'd be happy to dredge it up, but it's hard. Again, if the people aren't eventually willing to stand up and go crazy, then I don't know what it is.
People are gonna do that, wouldn't they do that already?
Well, that is another question. In other words, and the kind of the Tea Party was born by people kind of losing their mind about we're done. You know, we've just had it up to here. We've lost our ability to tolerate this insanity. So we've seen that sort of make a difference in national politics. I don't know. I mean, I'm an optimist by nature. I think that God still has plans for us here in the U.S., and I don't think we're doomed. But I think we're surely riding the edge of really badness. And I'm cautiously optimistic that this will push it. And the fact that Congress gives lip service to balanced budgets, and if they were forced to, see, here's a good example. The state of Georgia balances their budget every year. I wonder why that is. Because the Georgia Constitution says we have to. So we don't get to cheat and say, hey, we're going to just not balance our budget. So what happened in 2008, when the state revenues fell 20% in a year and a half, Georgia cut their budget by 20% cash, not 20% of projected revenues and 20% of growth and all the other tricks the feds play. We cut our budget 20% of cash. It peaked at 21 billion-ish and went down to 17, 18. Now we're almost back to 21, and that's another issue that I've been having with the folks downtown is that I don't think we should continue that path and just keep spending every dollar of tax money we make. We should give some of that back, but that's a different subject. But my point is that politicians will do things a lot of times if they're forced to do so. And if the Constitution forced them to do so and everybody kind of knew it, I think it would give them cover to do the politically unpopular things that were going to have to happen to balance the budget. I mean, balancing the budget at the federal level is going to make a lot of people mad because it's going to cut entitlements, it's going to cut a lot of programs, it's going to cut a bunch of things. And because of that, it's going to make people mad. And in order to give them the courage to do that, they have to say, well, I don't have any choice. The Constitution says so. Because I promise you, because I know my colleagues well enough, I love them to death, but I know enough of my colleagues, if there was not a balanced budget amendment in 2008, I'm really worried that they would have said, well, we have this massive economic hit, there's no way we can cut the budget 20%. If we cut the budget 20%, the world will come to an end. But guess what? We did it. And you know what? Did the world come to an end in the state of Georgia? No. Probably a lot of people didn't know. Now, you had a lot of problems in education where the teachers, and we had bigger class sizes, and it was felt throughout Georgia, but we lived. Everybody lived. And I always say that with budgets, and do that in business. You always think you can't deal with the budget cut, but when you actually do it, you actually somehow find a way to make it through. And that's the discipline we need. So I think we need to have them to force politicians to do it, and I think that will help. Yes, sir.
I believe the way the Constitution is written is that Congress would have no choice if there's an Article 5.
They're not supposed to have any choice.
I mean,
The wording is,
if 2/3 of the states
Yeah.
got together and proposed an amendment,
yeah,
and then it was ratified by 3/4 of the
yes, they'd
states,
have no choice.
Congress is out of the picture.
Well, even to call it says, on the application legislature, 2/3 of the states shall call a convention. It doesn't say may, it says shall. In other words, they don't have any choice about calling it. The reason Congress calls it, Congress, I guess, would say it's going to be on August 28th in St. Louis. But I didn't bring it with me, but there's some case law that it's called, it gets technical, but there's different kind of duties, and there's a ministerial duty, which is something where the law or the Constitution prescribes that you have no choice. This is a ministerial duty. It's pretty clear that I even think our Supreme Court, even more than 5-4, would make the Congress call the convention.
The only
What
issue.
they're talking about there is they're talking about application of
That's
the
right.
legislature, which
Yeah.
means that if
Yeah.
2/3 of the
Yeah.
states propose an amendment, it
Yeah.
has to be put before
Yeah.
all the states,
The-
regardless of anything. I mean, Congress is totally out of the picture.
Supposed
No, well, not exactly. If you look at the law, and I'm not a lawyer, but again, having been to a number of these meetings where this topic has come up, the Constitution actually says if 34 states, so if 2/3 call for the convention, then Congress shall set up the convention. It's not the states that set up the convention, unfortunately, because it doesn't state when Congress, how long Congress could take. So Congress could, theoretically, we get the 34 states, it's submitted, and Congress could take 2, 3, 4 years
Yeah.
debating when and where and who and what rules and everything. I mean, they could drag it
Install
out
it. Yeah.
for quite some time.
But the fifth doesn't actually call for a convention necessarily. If you look at it, if 34 states got together and proposed an amendment, it gets put before all the states. And if 3/4 of them at that point agree to it, it's part of the Constitution. Congress, the president.
It probably has to be
these
done
people
immediately.
Well, it becomes an amendment immediately.
It's-
Do you have the Article 5 there?
You
I
have the
didn't bring my
convention.
pocket constitution with me.
Yeah.
Do you have the Article 5? 'Cause I believe it does call,
It has to be a
Call for
convention.
it has to be a convention.
You can't
Article
just directly
5
do the amendments. I got Article 5 right here.
Yeah,
No, it says, okay, ratified, okay. Let's see, necessary, application.
I think we'd be doing that. If it was all it took for us to do the amendment, then we would have, I promise you, all the attorneys who looked at this in Georgia, I bet you we would have had the amendment already passed, sitting there waiting for the other states. And these people, these national groups, are studying this as hard as they can, and they've come up with different ways to skin the cat, and all of them lead to a convention. There's no direct amendment proposal on the table. So I don't think that's the case. Jeff?
Yeah, and that's one of the questions I get most often is why did we pass 3 different versions of it?
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time talking about that as to none of them eliminated the others. We just didn't know exactly what the other states, we wanted to match up with what the other states.
Match as many as possible.
Right. That's probably the question I get most
Yeah.
often about it.
Cool. Question, yes, ma'am?
What are the chances of this kind of thing actually happening? I hear about it vaguely, but the man on the street, I don't
Doesn't
think
know
really
about it.
knows too much about it. And I'm a big Greta Van Susteren fan, and she has done a lot of exposés about government waste.
Mhm.
And I don't understand why we don't start attacking that. If that is something we can do 1, 2, 3 and attack it instead of going for this huge thing that may never come to pass. The government waste situation is absolutely ridiculous and atrocious.
It is ridiculous and atrocious, but if you do the math at the federal level, well over half the spending of the entitlement, a lot of the entitlement is wasteful. You've got tons of fraud on Medicaid and Medicare. You've got welfare fraud. You have tons of entitlement fraud. But I think if you do the math on the baby boom generation, I'm just being straight up honest with you. A true balanced budget either means big tax increases. You probably could get maybe I'll say half of it with waste, but somebody's gonna feel it. But you had a great point first. Why don't they go ahead and basically get rid of all the waste first and then come to these other things? I can't answer why Congress doesn't do that. I will say one thing I was glad the governor did this year is he put money back in for fraud investigators with income tax and with Medicaid, Medicare here in Georgia to actually go back and try to do some more fraud work, which I think is, those people in my mind pay for themselves really fast. You pay some guy $70,000 a year to go be the investigator dude, and it doesn't take very much for him to repay his salary. And that kind of fraud is, you read the stories of some of the EBT food stamp fraud and just some of the other stuff, it's just.
Can I get a job doing that?
You want to do a job, Terry? I'll just set up that.
it's on commission.
Miss Cindy?
An example of that was
Yeah.
this year when we were starting our drug awareness
Yeah.
council. We discovered that there was a bogus council that had been in existence
Oh, that's right, I
in
read about
Forsyth
that.
County for
That's
10
right.
years. Well, we got all the information, we went to the sheriff's office, I did with
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it. Our guy that writes our grants
he did a really good job coming up with it all. Well, we carried it in to the sheriff, and they started their investigation, and the first investigator didn't do so hot, so we got another one. Sent them up to DC. We told them, we showed them. I mean, it was such a trail that I could even see it. I mean, there were 4 or 5 different businesses that they operated under. A lot of the same addresses,
Yeah.
but it was a Taekwondo business that it was the shell. Anyway, the long story short, even after we showed the federal government what was happening and we got a conviction, they still sent them another $125,000 check. They still got another check. They got over $1.2 million and would still be getting it had we not found it and brought it to their attention. And the gentleman that didn't get sent to prison, his wife did. Well, she really got probation, but he didn't because he's got terminal cancer. But he went to juvenile court and wanted to know, was there something he could do to make up for getting the grant? Is there something he could do to help with the kids? And so he said, I don't understand why this is happening, and they said my name in some way. And he said, well, would you tell her that I'm really good at writing grants?
No.
And if she would like for me to come and help, I'd be happy to.
Oh, my.
So it was generous, he was generous.
Wow. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, I mean,
But
it's,
that's typical, that's what's happening.
well, I've seen this in another area too. When I first got in the legislature, and the Race to the Top grant was just a thing, and I'm a technology guy, and I work on technology understanding, and part of the Race to the Top grant was spending on this big database for education. And we won't get into all that today, but I will tell you that I looked at it and said, well, there's like $20 million. And I said, what are they doing for $20 million? So I started digging in, and I said, wow, I could probably do that for $1 million, not $20 million. And so I went and asked the people, and long story short, they basically said, well, it's federal government's money, it's not our money. So they don't care, but it's not your own money. It's, it's easy to say, well, that's great, I have $20 million, I'm going to spend it. I'm going to hire these consultants over here, and these people over here, and really spend a lot of money. And that's the same thing with some of this grant money, is they don't feel like it belongs to anybody.
Well, and
Because
I
bureaucracies feel like it belongs to them.
It belongs to us.
belongs to China.
I had a judge sit in our office and tell me that grant money was free money, and I couldn't care.
What judge?
That's the way it.
What's his name?
That's a dangerous thing.
Free money, I'm supposed to turn down free money, and I said, it's not.
I see that in the legislature too. Is that there's a feeling that the federal money is money from heaven. I'm like, no, it's your money. It just happened to go up there first or be borrowed on your kid's behalf string. But it is a easy trap to fall into. Is that, again, politicians like to pass the buck to somebody else. So, okay, the feds are going to pay for that, and then we don't have to worry about it, and then magically it's not my problem anymore. And so that is a trap that everybody can fall into.
Free money, $1 goes up,
Right.
60 cents comes.
Comes back. Woo!
I mean, I think the problem with talking about money like that is that there is no money from the government without a string attached.
That's right.
And a lot of times what happens is that they'll give you, oh, we're gonna give you $10 million, but you're gonna have to spend 20. And you don't get to decide how to spend that 20. We'll
It's a whole-
decide how to do
It's
it.
a whole argument against Medicaid expansion here in Georgia, and the press keeps beating us up on that, but, oh yeah, I hear part of Obamacare, expand Medicaid, we're gonna give you 100% of the money for a couple of years, and then we're gonna give you 95% money. And the state's the one who ends up having to balance it, and since we're a balanced budget, guess who's gonna get a tax increase if that all blows up? And so the states are, and that's one reason why, go back to the beginning, I talked about the 17th Amendment, a lot of the things that the federal government had passed, the states are the ones who have to come out and make it all work. The entitlement programs are enforced mostly by the states, Medicaid, things like that. The highway, trying to actually build the highways, all these things the states are trying to, figure out and deal with and have to patch all the budget holes. And because of that, I don't think that if the Senate had a bunch of people who were appointed by the legislators who knew the legislators were going to be holding the bag, that they would pass as many of these federal government top-down money things. But you're right, the strings are always attached. And one thing I will give our county credit for, some of the Race to Top Education grant, is when I was on the school board, that when that came out, they called us and said, hey, Forsyth County, you're a great school system. We want you, baby. Sign up for the Race to Top grant. You get all this money, millions of dollars. You know what we did? Nope, not interested. Why are we not interested? Because we knew it all came with strings attached. You know, there was some money available for even building schools, and we always have trouble enough money to building schools here. That money came with union contracts and other kind of weird strings attached again. It's like, you know what? Luckily, Forsyth County is in a position where they don't have to accept as many of the string things, but you get some of my colleagues from rural Georgia who are poor areas, and they'll accept whatever money, wherever it comes from, because they want it. And so then the strings come in, and then the problems happen. So, all righty, I've got probably a few more minutes, and then I'll wrap it up. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little unrelated, but it
Sure.
does relate to the budget. It has to
Okay.
do with refugee resettlement relief,
Oh, yeah.
line 2600, I think, on the Georgia budget, somewhere around there.
I didn't bring my budget.
And I know that we're dumping a lot of money in, we have for years, and my understanding is DEAL does not want to continue to fund this. We would like to stop it, and obviously we have strings we can't get out of it totally. It's changing the landscape of our state, as it is others. And I'm very familiar with the Muslim infiltration that's going on. I know where the camps are, and it's ramping up. And so I'm wondering, you know, we're giving free housing, free phones, free whatever. What can we do about that?
I think one good thing is the awareness got ramped up on that big time this year that wasn't there before. And I'm hoping that with that, but again with politics, if you shine the big bright spotlight on it, it's much harder to do something when people are looking. One thing I give you credit about it, and I did kind of vaguely know about it, to be honest with you, but I've become much more educated just in the past 6 months on the issue. I think this whole thing with Central American Kids has brought it up, and the fact that it was in my budget, which is this thick, which I do better than most, and I know all the big picture things, and I try to get into it, but it's very hard to know every single line item in the budget. But that one I'll be looking for again. Once the ones kind of come out in the air, it's like, oh, I gotta make sure I look for that one. One funny thing is, so funny, y'all remember Sunny Purdue's Go Fish program? So my freshman year, literally the second day I'm at the legislature, and they passed out the budget from the governor, and it was, because it was, Nathan Deal had just taken over, like that day, the day before, a lot of the budget had come through Sunny Purdue's budget office. And so all the legislatures were tearing through the budget saying, where's that stupid Go Fish program? Because they wanted to make sure they could find it to get rid of it. And they did find it to get rid of it. So I guess the good news is the spotlight is on will help. But I will say one of the best things about the Tea Party has been in the state legislature has been that, and I came in, I was elected in 2010, which is kind of when the Tea Party was really cresting. And so I wasn't there before, but they talk to my colleagues at length, and they'll say, wow. It used to be that not that many people were paying attention to the details of what the old Gold Dome was doing. I tell you what, that is not true now. There's a lot of Tea Party other folks who are down there every day looking really hard at what we are doing, and it makes us better, and it keeps, frankly, a lot of shenanigans from being played. And so that's one area where I think the Tea Party interest in revival, by paying more attention to things like you're just talking about, bring them the light. As soon as you shine the light on them, everybody says, ooh, I can't be doing the same old thing anymore. So I'm hoping that that's one of those issues that by shining the light on it, that it won't go through. And good to hear the governor, I did hear that he was not on board with continuing it. Georgia is a strong governor form of government. Some of the comparisons say we have 4th, 5th, 6th strongest governor in the country. That's not Nathan Deal particular, just the way we've set up as far as the governor's power. The governor essentially sets the revenue number, and we can only spend that number. He sets it unilaterally, and then he presents a budget to the legislature, which is pretty well flushed out, and we do have the authority to make major changes, but the way it works in reality, the governor is a very important part of the budget process. So when the governor says something in the budget, it's an important thing, so it's good to know that he did that. All right, I got time for one more question if you got it, and then we'll probably need to wrap it up. Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards. Do you have any other questions? And thank you all, and God bless America.